Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Banner Baseball Live Chat. We hope that you can hear us. If you can't, let us know in the comments, and we'll try this all over again. We've done it before. Paul Mancano and Andy Kostka here, trying to get you through the offseason as these two teams in the World Series are getting things going, and the Orioles themselves have quite a lot to decide upon over the next few months. So Andy and I are going to go over a couple of the most recent articles on the BaltimoreBanner.com where you can subscribe for $1 for 6 months if you haven't done so already. I don't quite know what you're doing. But we talked about in a little couple roundtables, Andy, the acquisitions that Mike Elias made via trade and the acquisitions that Mike Elias made via free agency last winter. I think we can start with the free agents because those were the chronological ones to go with. And let's start with the move that Mike Elias made right as winter meetings was starting last year. The biggest contract that he had handed out to a free agent since he came to Baltimore. And that would be the signing of Kyle Gibson, which he was pleased to announce to gathered media in a hotel room on the first day of winter meetings. 1 year, $10 million.
Yeah, and Kyle Gibson, wasn't the flashiest signing at the time. Me included, kind of thought that, hey, this is a depth starter, maybe a number 5 starter before the Orioles swing big. They never really swung big on the free agent pitcher side. That they had inquiries out on other players. It just nothing kind of came in that regard. But Gibson turned into a pretty reliable starter for the Orioles, and I think you have to love what he did in the clubhouse, especially, and that's part of the reason why they signed him. Definitely wasn't, as I said, it wasn't the flashiest, but he did the trick, and you wonder if he's back next year. Probably not, but he definitely contributed a lot.
Well, Mike Elias loves his innings eaters.
Yeah,
we knew that when he signed Jordan Lyles to that 1+1 contract, ended up not picking up the option on that side, which was for, I believe, $10 million with a $1 million buyout. Yeah. So he essentially could have brought back Jordan Lyles for the same amount of money, chose not to, and then ended up signing a pitcher of similar ilk. Ended up being the right decision because Jordan Lyles ended up having a very tough year with the Kansas City Royals.
Yeah, my one thing for Jordan Lyles, obviously not much run support in Kansas City and a much worse defense behind him. Not that it changed much. Kyle Gibson was the correct option, in hindsight, but definitely was not the ideal circumstances for Jordan Lyles either. And Jordan was a great, clubhouse presence as well. So, credit to both of them for what they did.
And when that move was made, when the Kyle Gibson signing was made, I remember thinking, okay, he's a nice addition to this rotation, but what else is coming? There has to be another move. And that was at a time when a lot of guys were still out there. I believe Rodon was still out there. Orioles were probably never going to be in the market for Carlos Rodon at that point. So far, 1 year in, it seems like the Orioles are okay not signing him. But there were a lot of other guys out there. Nathan Eovaldi was still out there. Michael Wacha, I believe, was still out there at that point. Those guys ended up being pretty good signings for their respective teams. Even like Taijuan Walker and, those Jameson Taillon, those kind of second tier starting pitchers were still out there. The Orioles didn't end up making another signing. And when we left winter meetings, Mike Elias said, we're still being very aggressive and we're still monitoring the free agent market, the trade market for starting pitchers. They did end up acquiring Cole Irvin a few months later. But I remember being a little bit underwhelmed when Kyle Gibson ended up being the only, quote unquote, big money signing that they made for the rotation that offseason.
Yeah, and it did work in some respects. In the postseason, it did not work. And I think that is where you look at, a Nathan Eovaldi, somebody that has that experience, a mid-tier free agent starter. You didn't need to go for Carlos Rodon, but, would have been, I think the O's will probably play in that, mid-tier market again, this offseason. But, you feel like, the steps that Dean Kramer took, Kyle Bradish took, Grayson Rodriguez took in the second half, that's promising for the future. And maybe it means you don't have to take as big of a swing. But still, it was maybe somewhat of a surprise that the O's didn't, nab another starter just because of how uncertain it was entering the season. You could not have pictured it to have worked out the way it did, and then how it didn't in the postseason. But you figure again they will be in the market for a starting pitcher even with all those guys back.
Yeah, and I understand the desire by Mike Elias to keep that deal short. The Orioles were, I don't think, ever going to hand somebody last offseason anything close to 3 or 4 or 5 years, just because they wanted to see what they had in that rotation. And when you're a small market team like they are, they're being very careful not to make a misstep that could hurt them years down the line. We all know Chris Davis being the prime example of that move that they say is still hampering them to this day. They're still paying him until 2035, I believe.
Yeah.
They didn't want to make that kind of big misstep that could hurt them long term. However, you're not going to, if you continue to hand out 1-2 year deals, you're kind of limiting, you're putting a ceiling on the quality of starting pitcher that you can get. Because at a certain point, starting pitchers, there's such a dearth of them in the market in general. They're going to get big money deals, and the good ones are going to get long years. So you are kind of hampering yourself in terms of how good a starting pitcher you can sign in the offseason. So maybe eventually, maybe it's this offseason, maybe it's next offseason, they're going to have to start to up not just the money, but the years in terms of these contracts. And maybe this offseason, we will finally see the first ever multi-year deal where there's multi-year guaranteed. Jordan Lyles' deal had an option, but several years guaranteed on one of these contracts.
That is the one interesting thing. We haven't seen since Mike Elias arrived, obviously, he has not signed a player to a multi-year guaranteed contract. That would be really interesting to see if that, is the case this offseason, or whether, there's always a potential that, instead of, doing that to a free agent, you do it to one of your internal guys and do a large extension for, maybe it's Adley Rutschman extension. That's always on the table too. Not likely, I don't think, but it is, another avenue they could go for a long-term venture.
Yeah. Going back to the Kyle Gibson one, what did do you remember what, I know, I apologize. I was the one driving us way off track there.
Yeah.
What did you end up giving him? Do you remember as a grade?
I believe I gave a B.
Okay.
Because it was a good deal. It was a good deal, but it was also, at the same time, he did not, he was not the kind of game-changing pitcher that maybe the Orioles needed. A frontline starter, Kyle Bradish, excuse me, kind of developed into that as the season went on. But definitely at the beginning of the season, it did appear that the O's needed a high-end pitcher to add to the market. But B, because he did bring a lot to number one, innings eating, which is a big thing for any team. And then number two, just his clubhouse camaraderie and what he taught guys around him was important. So a solid B.
I believe I went a little bit lower in the C range just because I do remember when that signing was made, Elias saying we see some things in Kyle Gibson in his last couple of years with Philadelphia that we feel like our pitching department can tap into, and he will have a very good year for us. The overall numbers were not a whole lot different from what he put up in Philadelphia last season. And the fact that he wasn't one of the top 3 starters for an ALDS, he didn't end up reaching a much better, much higher level than what he hit in Philadelphia. His ERA was slightly lower. I believe it was, about 30 points lower than in Philadelphia. His WAR was slightly higher according to Fangraphs and according to Baseball Reference. But night in, night out, he wasn't the, a much better, a much different pitcher. And he was 35 years old. So it's not like you were going to get this great resurgent season for him just because of the physical decline. But I remember being a little bit underwhelmed when he's kind of, Elias kind of hyped up the expectation by saying, we see some things in him that we feel like we can tap into. I'm still kind of waiting for those tweaks to be made, because I think he made some tweaks around the edges that helped him, but he was not a completely different pitcher than he was the last couple of years.
Yeah, I know he altered his pitch mix slightly, not the pitch mix itself, but the percentages of some of the pitches.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't a huge adjustment or anything like that. And, at the end of the day, fairly similar to what he did in Philadelphia. Did not receive a playoff start, just as he did not in Philadelphia the year before, which is disappointing for him probably, but. Obviously, I think if you go back and you don't know the outcomes, you probably go with those 3 starters that Brandon Hyde did.
Absolutely. we are live as well on YouTube, so we can take comments as we go along. Just want to make sure that you guys can hear us. Please let us know if you guys can hear us, because I assume so. We are getting a comment. We got one from Antonio about whether the Orioles will spend any big money this offseason to become World Series contenders. I do, think that the overall payroll of this team is going to go up naturally by arbitration money, but I do think that the Orioles will be a little bit looser with the checkbook than they have been in previous years, just because you have proof of concept now. You know that this is a team that has the pieces in place already in house to go out and win potentially another AL East title, or at least be a wild card team. And it's adding to that team that you believe Mike Elias should be given the reins to. And I think that this team is going to spend more this winter than they did last year. I don't know how much more. I don't know if it's $5 million more. I don't know if it's $20 million more. But I think that this team is going to spend a little bit more this offseason than they did last offseason.
Yeah, well, I agree purely on the principle that there's going to be many raises for the arbitration process. You figure, Santander, for instance, is projected via MLB trade rumors to receive $12 million for 2024, which is a pretty large jump in what he made annually, which is good for him because he had another great year. But I have a hard time seeing a large splash in the free agent market. It is interesting, like, to look at the Texas Rangers and the Arizona Diamondbacks for a second.
That you wrote about on
I
the
did.
Baltimore
Yeah,
where you can subscribe for $1 for 6 months.
what a plug! This guy is a company man.
There we go.
What was it saying?
Texas Rangers and Arizona Diamondbacks.
Ah, there we
what
go.
You can learn from those
what
teams.
you can learn from those teams.
Yeah.
You look, they constructed their rosters in two different ways, and they're ways that Baltimore can learn from. And one way is, okay, we're maybe not doing that with the Texas Rangers way, and splashing 10 years to Corey Seager, which, the early returns of that looks like a terrific deal, just of how amazing he has been all season and now in the postseason. But the Texas Rangers added a lot in terms of what they did in free agency, and then they also were very aggressive in the trade market at the deadline to go get I believe Jordan Montgomery. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jordan Montgomery and Max Scherzer. Yeah, duh. The Rangers or the Diamondbacks did it a little bit different way, and they were aggressive in the trade market, less aggressive in free agent spending. That could be, the Diamondbacks are probably a little bit closer to what the Orioles could follow, in terms of, you have your internal stars, the Corbin Carrolls, the Alec Thomas, those guys that are,
Gabby Moreno.
Thank you. Yeah, that you either drafted, developed, or traded for in Moreno.
Yeah.
But you also supplemented it at the deadline with a very good closing pitcher. That they went out and got. That was not a minor move.
No,
it was
Seawold
definitely.
is. I remember Orioles fans wanting Paul Seawold.
Yeah, and it would have, obviously, hindsight. Of course, it would have been great with Felix Bautista, sidelined with his injury. It would have been, very helpful to have a guy with that kind of pedigree late in games. So that might be more of the market they go for. They ended up getting a Tommy Pham who, resurgent year after what he did the previous year, and he's been a great piece for the Diamondbacks. So you might see them kind of work the edges of the market again, look for guys that could bounce back. I know they hoped Adam Frazier was going to be one of those candidates. In terms of OPS, Adam Frazier was a improved power hitter, probably because of the short porch in right field at Camden Yards helped a little bit, but really tapered off power at the end of the year. Now I'm getting off topic. We're talking about Adam Frazier now.
No, I mean that's a perfect topic.
Yeah, jumping into that, but his average was again, only a couple percentage points higher than it was in 2022, and he was disappointed with his 2022 numbers, and I imagine overall, even with the power numbers being slightly higher, probably was not his favorite season that he's ever had as a major leaguer.
Yeah, we'll go wherever the conversation takes us, and be sure to comment as well below, as we are live on YouTube. Thank you to everybody tuning in. But I'm glad you bring up Adam Frazier, because we said we were going to discuss what we wrote on the BaltimoreBanner.com, grading Mike Elias's free agent moves and his trades during the past year. Adam Frazier made a lot of sense in my mind when he was signed. 1 year, $8 million, didn't break the bank. You were asking for a resurgent season. He had a down season last year with Seattle. And I remember when he was signed, a lot of fans saying, "What does Adam Frazier bring that Terran Vavra or Jordan Westbrook wouldn't bring?" Well, Terran Vavra ended up not having a good season by any stretch. He played in, I believe, 25 games, had negative WAR, ended up getting hurt, and just is not. He may have a good career, big league wise, but he just is not a finished, complete product, and he was not healthy this past year. And Jordan Westberg came up at the end of the season, halfway through the year, and ended up playing in the playoffs. And he was very good through a lot of that, but there's no guarantee if he had made the opening day roster that he would have been that player 162 games. To me, Frazier brought a steadying presence to an infield that you had Gunnar Henderson flashing incredible tools over at shortstop, third base, wherever he was playing.
Yep.
You had Ramon Arias, who took kind of a step back this season, I think you could say.
Definitely.
And Jorge Mateo, who struggled offensively for the vast majority of the season.
And was not as flashy defensively.
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe he was still flashy, excuse me, but
not
just
consistent.
Not consistent. Yeah, that's.
And he still was an above average fielder, but he was not nearly the Gold Glove caliber fielder this past year that he was in 2022. And I think Frazier just fit a perfect role for this team. I don't think they have any need or desire to re-sign him this offseason. But for what he was asked to do, which is come in, provide a little bit of steadying presence on that right side of the infield, his defensive metrics were not very good, but watching him play night in and night out, I didn't think he was hampering the team defensively by any stretch. That's one of those instances where you look at the eye test does not match the metrics there.
Yeah.
I think that Frazier did exactly what the Orioles asked him to do. And I think that, despite the fact that he didn't homer for the last 2 months of the season, he was pretty much what the Orioles were hoping they were going to get for $8 million.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it was a fairly low risk.
Yeah.
He was coming into a position where the Orioles did not have a proven quantity yet. I mean, you could have said, add Joey Ortiz to your list of, you had Terran Vavra, Jordan Westberg, could have been Joey Ortiz as a guy that could play there. But those were unproven quantities at the major league level. And in the short bit that a couple of them did play, did not really produce at that high of a level. Joey, obviously a terrific defender at shortstop, especially. Jordan Westberg, I think, came on very well as the season went on. And I think you have to believe that he's probably his role next year. Maybe that's somewhat debatable with Jackson Holiday in the mix potentially. But you'd imagine it's Jordan Westbrook's position out of spring. And I think you shake Adam Frazier's hand and say, thank you very much. And, you did a good job and
best of luck.
Yep. Good luck elsewhere. But he did the job he needed to for Baltimore. He was not the flashiest signing. Again, don't expect many flashy signings. This is not going to be Marcus Semien, for the Rangers, but definitely, accomplished what they needed.
And that's a position where I think the Orioles, if they were going to hand a multi-year deal to somebody last offseason, I could have seen starting pitcher because you could see a longer-term need there. But for the infield, you knew Jackson Holiday was coming up. You didn't know he was going to have as great a season in the minor leagues that he did. You knew Jordan Westberg was on his way. You knew Joey Ortiz was a nice option as well. You still have Connor Norby in the minor leagues. You still have Kobe Mayo in the minor leagues. So I understand the Orioles not wanting to hand a multi-year deal to somebody in the infield. And looking at the free agents in terms of the infield, it's a pretty raggy group there. It's not the best group. And so I don't expect the Orioles to go back to that well. What did you end up giving the Adam Frazier signing on the BaltimoreBanner.com?
Oof, I forget. I believe it was a C because it was fine.
Yeah.
It was passable. C's good degrees.
Yeah, so, I gave it more in the B range just because, I think he fit that need. And he was mostly healthy for the year, 140 some games. Other free agent signing, the grades get not as great here when we start talking about Michael Givens.
Yeah.
I really liked the signing when it was made because I thought it was a nice story. It was exactly what they needed for this bullpen, which is just a reliable guy who is going to give you a 3.3, 3.5 ERA. He's going to take up a lot of lower leverage, can be used in higher leverage situations, medium leverage. You can pretty much rely on him. and then you couldn't at all. The Orioles did not rely on him because
Yeah.
he was hurt from spring training. He ended up pitching in a few games the start of the year. Those games did not go well, and then he ended up being hurt and released by the end of the season.
Yeah. Hopefully we're not freezing right now, but we're back.
We're back,
Maybe.
yeah.
He, I think, pitched all of 4 innings for Baltimore in this return, and
Yeah.
you said it right. I mean, the addition of a veteran guy that could pitch later in games obviously wasn't going to be the closer, but a high leverage arm was something that I still think the O's are definitely going to need this offseason too.
Yeah.
If not a closer, they're going to need a additional back end help for this bullpen. It did not work at all with Michael Givens, and that's too bad for him, obviously. And you have to feel that it's harsh grading this because we have the luxury of hindsight, as
Yeah.
I continually say. But at the time, it was a fine deal.
Yeah.
Definitely, in hindsight, though, an expensive miss. Just in terms of it wasn't expensive in the grand scheme of things, but
Right.
expensive in the kind of contracts that have been given out. And that was another one where it was one guaranteed year, one option year. I believe it ended up with $6 million total when you have the buyout included in that. So expensive 4 innings that did not go well.
Yeah, no, and you look at this this team and the playoff roster that they put out for the ALDS, and you think, boy, it would have been nice to have Dylan Tate, who ended up missing the entire season, or Michael Givens on that playoff roster, because Brian Baker made this playoff roster, and they could have used somebody more reliable, somebody with more big league experience in that bullpen, and probably would not have made the difference in a best of 5 series against the Texas Rangers. But the latter half of the season, especially once Felix Bautista went down, you just felt like this team was desperate for some kind of reliable righty. It's the reason that they claimed Jorge Lopez and gave him opportunities. A guy who, was great for Baltimore in 2022, but was not a big league caliber pitcher over the last year and a half. Unfortunately, they were so desperate to find that guy, and Michael Givens should have been that guy.
Jacob Webb, claiming him, and giving him so many opportunities, maybe too many. As
in
you
the
get
playoffs.
Yeah, and almost too many in the playoffs. Not to switch over to trades, but it just reminds me of Shintaro Fujinami. The one relief addition at the in the trade market. The Orioles were looking for further relief additions and didn't pull the trigger on any of them. But I think there's a case to be made where Fujinami's on the playoff roster rather than Brian Baker, and obviously Fujinami is a little bit of a wild card too. Is he going to throw strikes? He could be phenomenal with throwing sinkers in there that are 100 miles per hour and with a great slider, and also could completely miss the strike zone. And we've seen both of them in this short amount of time that he was in Baltimore. So not saying that is the difference between a series loss and a series win by any stretch of the imagination. But that's another one where the O's went out and got somebody, and he did not contribute actually in the biggest stake. They chose not to have him contribute in that stake. So that one, it turns out, it was very low. I mean, you got rid of Easton Lucas, so it wasn't the heaviest, trade you could have done, the heaviest outbound portion of that trade. But definitely it doesn't look as great as it might have because of the fact that he did not make the postseason roster.
And let us know what you think of these free agent signings, of these trades. Please comment below as we are live on YouTube, and let us know what you think of the live chat and where we should go with our conversations. But
I did get a question about whose cardboard arm this is.
Yeah, that's a cardboard arm. That is not a real arm. Just to be clear. That's should we get into it?
Why not? It's our former CEO Imtiaz. He's looking at him. He's there. He's hanging out. He's looking over our shoulder as he used to when he did work here. And now we are free reign. They gave us a microphone and said, "Go do your thing." So
I'm glad he didn't bug that thing. You could just put like couple eyes on there. So yeah, that is not a real person watching over us. I'm glad you brought up the trades. We can get into some of the midseason trades, and I have some thoughts on the Shintaro Fujinami trade.
Please jump in.
Let's start though with the James McCann trade,
Okay,
because
yeah.
that chronologically happened, I believe, right around Christmas last year.
It did, yeah.
And what a terrific trade that ended up being. I remember the Mets, their last offseason, they're going through this massive upheaval, roster upheaval. They're adding starting pitchers left and right. They sign Omar Narvaez to a 2-year, $15 million deal. They ship James McCann off to the Orioles and offer to pay a large portion of his contract. I think they would do that again, the Orioles, 100 times out of 100, because that is he ended up being the perfect addition as a backup catcher. There is a lack of good catchers in baseball, period. There's an even bigger lack of good backup catchers in baseball. James McCann was a good backup catcher this past year.
Yeah, I mean 0.5 wins above replacement, if I recall correctly, for James McCann, which is nothing to hang your hat on as a starter, but as a backup, was exactly what Baltimore needed. He gives Adley Rutschman days off his knees as a catcher. He kind of fit the bill, especially in the clubhouse, as a one of the lone vets in that clubhouse, and you watched him with his kids running around, and it was always just a great clubhouse ad as well. And he is under contract for next year as well.
Yeah.
So you have the stability of somebody who knows, between he and Adley, they know the pitching staff. That's a great thing. I think it could be a benefit.
And it was a player that they sent out in the deal.
Yeah.
Ended up being a player who did not rack up a single game played in the Mets minor league system this past year.
I truly don't know what happened.
Yeah.
I don't.
It's honestly, I mean, it's difficult to follow a lot of the machinations on the rosters in the Dominican Summer League, just because we're not there. We don't have boots on the ground. There aren't a whole lot of reporters down there that are keeping us updated. Mm-hmm. I don't know what happened to him. He had played 2 years in the Orioles Dominican Summer League, and he's, I believe, 19, 20 years old. And, he's obviously the main reason the Mets made that deal was not to acquire him. It was to get rid of James McCann's contract. But it appears that he has fallen off the radar. So you really did not give up a whole lot. It ends up being just essentially a free agent signing for the Orioles.
Practically. And, maybe in 2 years, we're going to be like, where did this guy come from? And the Mets are going to have the next superstar.
Like Fernando Tatis.
Yeah. But, definitely in 2023, at least, it didn't hurt watching a minor leaguer rake through the Dominican Summer League or anything like that.
Yeah.
And, James McCann, again, he has a hefty contract, but the Mets paid a large chunk of it.
I think over half
bulk
of it.
Yeah. So it did not cost all that much.
And when you look at the Orioles' future at catcher, Adley Rutschman's entrenched, but behind him, Samuel Basallo, who had a phenomenal year. If it wasn't for Jackson Holliday, we'd be talking more about Samuel Basallo and the year that he had, because he was phenomenal. Average over 300, jumped 2 levels, OPS close to 900 this past season. He probably is the future backup catcher for the Orioles if he's not, traded away for some other starting pitcher or a major league caliber player. But McCann is a nice little stopgap, because Basallo, I believe, finished the year in Double-A Bowie. He's not going to be breaking camp with this Orioles team. So to have James McCann under contract for another year while you wait for Basallo to get there is nice.
It is nice. And I think there is a large path to playing time for Samuel Basallo, not just as a backup catcher. And, if you figure as a backup catcher, you might start 3 games a week, especially with how they want to, take care of Adley Rutschman. But Basallo can be a DH. He can be a first baseman if you need him to, backup first baseman. So there's going to be a lot of at-bats for a guy like him, unless he's traded. Yeah. And of course, he will probably be a attractive trade piece. Yeah, he will be an attractive trade piece for many teams. Look at what Gabriel Moreno did for the Diamondbacks. You trade for a catching prospect from the Blue Jays, and he turns into a
phenomenal player. And one of their 3-4 hitters in the World Series.
Yeah.
I could see that being the future of the Orioles backstop position. So that's the McCann trade. Then let's get into the Cole Irvin trade that followed.
Yeah.
This one I am not nearly as big a fan of. And they end up trading Darryl Hernandez. It was a deal where they acquired also Kyle Verbitsky, who is a minor league arm, who is probably fringe, top 30, maybe slightly out of the top 30 in terms of Orioles top prospects. Darryl Hernandez had a phenomenal year in the Oakland athletic system. He got up to AAA. He's still quite young. I believe he's 21, 22 years old. Cole Irvin, the Orioles traded for to be the lefty that was going to fit into this rotation while they waited for John Means to come back. And the first month of the season could not have gone worse for Cole Irvin. Ended up having a 10 ERA through his first 4 starts, was optioned down to AAA Norfolk, came back up, was started some games, really came out of the bullpen a couple times. I just don't Darryl Hernandez, I don't think, had a path to big league playing time this year, probably not next year, maybe not in 2025. But the Orioles still gave up something of value for a pitcher that, frankly, underperformed in 2023.
He did underperform. I didn't mind the trade as much just because Cole Irvin is under team control still.
True.
He has a lot of years of team control ahead of him. I believe 3 more after this. You can fact check me on that. But, so he has the potential to still be in the mix. I don't imagine him in the starting rotation, but as a long man or as a spot starter, I think there is value there. And with Darryl and Hernandez,
yeah,
I don't see the way he's breaking into this infield.
No,
with how many infielders you have. But of course, the hindsight of the opposite side of that, to play devil's advocate, is with a guy that has obviously performed as well as Darryl has. You hope that you had received a bigger contributor back.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Because whether or not, he was ever going to play for the Baltimore Orioles at the big league level, Hernandez is still a good prospect who is going to be in every team's top 30 prospect list. I think he could be in the MLB top 100 prospect list soon based on how he's been playing. So you hope it's a similar conversation. We'll get to Jack Flaherty in a moment, but it's a similar conversation to that, which is, Drew Rom and Cesar Prieto probably didn't have paths to being on the Baltimore Orioles big league roster this year or next year, but they are still assets, and you want to maximize the assets that you have. And I just wonder if they were able to combine Hernandez and package him with other, highly touted prospects, or somebody like a Drew Rom or Cesar Prieto back during the offseason. I think that they maybe could have gotten a little bit more. And it's impossible to say what other players were available, what other offers Mike Elias received. I just feel like it was a low ceiling swing. I didn't particularly love the deal at the time, and Cole Irvin could still be a contributor in 2024 and beyond. But it will be certainly interesting to follow from afar the career of Darryl Hernandez. He'll certainly have an opportunity on the terrible Oakland A's team.
Yeah.
And maybe he will make the most of it and make Mike Elias look bad. You never know.
Well, you never know. He could be the centerpiece for the Las Vegas Athletics or whatever. Yeah. So, he could have a bright future. But that is the nature of, this business. I mean, just think of Jonah Heim, former Baltimore farmhand.
Yep.
Who, now here he is, the starting catcher for a World Series team. Sometimes you trade away guys and it doesn't work out. It is disappointing that, Cole Irvin didn't make as big of an impact as I think I expected him to. He was definitely a great clubhouse guy. There can be no doubt about that. But at the same time, just left a little bit to be desired. I think he still has room to grow as a pitcher, and he he's still he's in his late 20s, which is not it's you're still in development as a starting pitcher or as a long man, and there is definitely value for him as a long man. And I think honestly he could have made the postseason roster too, and I'm kind of surprised that he didn't, just because of the need for you expect shorter starts from your starting pitchers in the postseason, and we obviously saw 2 very short starts from pitchers that you could not have expected to be that short.
No.
or of that quality compared to what they had done for most of the season. But a guy like Cole Irvin would have been incredibly valuable out of the bullpen in those situations. And instead, they had Jack Flaherty pitch a little bit in Game 2 of the ALDS, but I think it was only 2 innings from him. But Jack Flaherty was not he was infrequently used as a long man, as a reliever, even after he had been removed from the starting rotation down the stretch. Meanwhile, Cole Irvin down the stretch had been a very reliable relief pitcher. If you look at his stats the last month and a half, 2 months, I mean, he actually was, a very reliable pitcher in that role. So just another, small quibble that maybe, could have gone a little bit different way. Obviously that doesn't change, the series result or anything like that. But just a minor thing that maybe you think about.
Yeah. We are live, as a reminder, and you can comment and let us know what you think of these moves that Mike Elias made during 2023. And also, what the Orioles should do in this offseason. If you see me looking at my phone, I'm checking the comments. I'm checking Twitter. So please don't think that I'm just tuning you out, Andy. I'm listening to every single word that you're saying. I absolutely promise you.
I'm used to people tuning me out. Don't worry. But to jump over to some of the minor deals, if you don't mind, and we'll just run through these really quickly. Danny Coulombe and Ryan O'Hearn. Both of those trade for cash.
Yep.
Start with Danny Coulombe.
Well, first off, we have to acknowledge Cash had a terrific season. I mean, not a single earned run allowed, not a single hit. Did not walk a batter. Cleveland got a phenomenal return. I mean, Cash is going to be a mainstay for years.
Well, Minnesota for
Minnesota for Danny Coulombe and Cleveland. Did Cleveland? No,
Cleveland had no one. Yeah, Kansas City was Ryan O'Hearn.
That's right. I'm confusing him with Adam Plutko. A lot of these moves, I think, we forget about. A lot of these player for cash trades. The Orioles, I promise you, are going to make a player for cash trade 100%. One way or the other, more than one. They're going to send out cash. They're going to get back cash. These moves are made all the time. Rarely do they have the kind of impact that Ryan O'Hearn did for the Orioles this year and that Danny Coulombe did for the Orioles this year.
Yeah, they were worth every penny of that cash.
We don't know how much.
We don't know how much, but it
could have been. What if it was $1 billion?
All right, then that'd be something.
That'd be a wholly overpay.
Yeah. But imagining that they're just buying their contract out from those teams. Incredible, return on both of those. You can't always expect this, but a terrific job from the player development staff. Number one,
yes.
A terrific job from Mike Snyder and the pro scouting department. Number two, there's a lot that goes into a trade like this, practically a signing, but a trade like this, guys behind the scenes that have scouted countless minor league games, countless games over the past couple of years, spring training games, that goes into, that guy could be a contributor.
Yeah.
And they noticed in whether it was in spring training or before that Danny Coulombe had an opportunity here as a left-hander and really developed into a absolute, stable, reliable option out of the bullpen. Gained high leverage roles by the end of it.
Yeah.
I mean, the situations he came into in the postseason, I don't envy that on anybody.
No.
Runners on base almost every single time he came in, and he got out of it. So he did. Just you can't say enough about what he did. Danny Coulombe, obviously for that. But you also can't expect that from every single cash signing or trade. Rather
purchase.
Purchase because they are a little bit of a let's see. Let's go out and get somebody and let's see what happens. And in this case, it worked. They struck gold twice with Danny Coulombe and now Ryan O'Hearn, which, to just jump into Ryan O'Hearn, corner outfielder. If you need him to be first baseman, played a good brand of first base. Honestly, defensively, and then DH too was a really good left-handed bat that did not get the opportunity in the postseason that maybe he would have wanted just because they stacked left-handed starters, Texas,
smartly
to begin, very smartly, and it obviously worked wonders for them. But in the last week of a season saw his average dip below 300 to 289, I believe he ended at. But it was not to take away from just probably the best season definitely the best season of his career. And uh, he fit the mold of the clubhouse. I mean, I think of the way he got that bunt down to clinch the American League, East, I believe it was that night. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was that night. I think it was that night. But he gets a bunt down. Hadn't bunted since like freshman year of college, and here he is. Gets the thing down, and his quote is not something I'll repeat without asterisks, but he'll get he said I'll bleep and get it down, and that was just this attitude that I think you love in a player, and so he really fit that clubhouse well. Imagine he'll be back next year. He's an arbitration candidate. There's never any guarantees, but you'd imagine he'd be back because he's still relatively inexpensive when all things considered. I think he made a little bit over 1 million this year, probably in the 3.5 million range next year, which I think for if you feel like you get anything near what he did this year, is definitely something you take.
Yeah, because the Orioles last offseason, they had the opportunity, if they wanted to sign a lefty first baseman, corner outfield type to complement Ryan Mountcastle, and they chose not to do it. And at the time, I thought it was a mistake because there were a lot of guys out there. Carlos Santana was a first baseman, switch hitter who has a lot of pop from the left side. I thought he might be a good fit. If Jock Peterson hadn't picked up his qualifying offer in San Francisco, he would have been a good fit. There were a lot of guys out there that I think the Orioles could have taken a swing on. Joey Gallo was another guy who I know he can play center and is a good outfielder, but you could have used him at first base maybe. But they seemed content with who they had, and they took a lot of minor swings.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was not just Ryan O'Hearn that they picked up.
Yeah,
there were many guys. Yeah,
who they claimed DFA'd about 14 times. But
poor guy.
Yeah, poor guy. But he ended up on the Orioles, so you thought he's got experience with the Marlins. Maybe he's the guy. They signed Franchi Cordero to a minor league deal. You thought maybe
it was a little Nomar Mazara.
Nomar Mazara, yeah.
I forget if he played any. I know he was, corner outfield as well, but might have gotten a couple innings at first in the spring.
Yeah.
So there was a whole bunch of guys.
Josh Lester, who ended up making this team.
Yeah.
So I thought you're taking a lot of flyers on guys, and you're hoping you're going to hit on one of them. I thought they should have put all of those resources into one big leaguer and just taken a big swing. Mike Elias proved me wrong because it ended up being the right move because what you got from Ryan O'Hearn made up for not having a big league signing at first base, and he fit perfectly.
Well, you remember Ryan O'Hearn did not make the roster out of spring.
Yeah.
And just exploded in Norfolk, was hitting home runs practically every fifth at bat down there.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay, bring him up, see what happens.
Yep.
And then he kind of did the same thing in the major leagues.
Exactly.
So it worked out, really well, and obviously an A on that one as well.
You think about where also the Orioles would be without him because when Mountcastle goes down, on the injured list and then down to Norfolk because he's dealing with vertigo, the Orioles, if they didn't have a quality backup option, I mean, that offense would have severely suffered. Mm-hmm. And O'Hearn boosted that offense. And I thought even last offseason, maybe the Orioles were going to try Kyle Stowers at first base because he was a lefty. He could have been a good complement for Ryan Mountcastle. Could play in the corner outfield.
Heston Kjerstad too in that mix,
And unfortunately, Stowers had some injuries. He didn't play the entire season. He ended the season with AAA Norfolk. He didn't have quite the season that he was expecting, I think. But O'Hearn was exactly what the Orioles needed at a crucial time in the season when their starting first baseman went down.
Yeah, you can't really say enough about him. So I think we'll leave it there.
Yeah,
and say we said enough about him.
Perfect.
But shifting over to who's next on the list.
Yeah, so we are going through, if you're just joining us live on YouTube, we are going through all of the moves that the Orioles made during the 2023 and before the 2023 season. We covered the free agents. Now we're we're covering the trades as well, and we're trying to go chronologically. We may miss a couple here and there, and let us know in the comments. Please let us know in the comments what you think of the show and also what you think of a lot of the moves that Mike Elias made during the season, and check out on the BaltimoreBanner.com our grades of all of these. We just went through Danny Coulombe and Ryan O'Hearn. Next up, I think we can touch on Shintaro Fujinami.
Yeah, and we talked about him a tiny bit previously.
Yeah,
so we won't make it too long, but
Yeah.
again, probably should have been on the postseason roster. But again, was a unknown commodity many times when he would come into pitch.
Did you know Shintaro Fujinami's name before the Orioles traded for him?
No.
You can be honest.
No.
Yeah, I didn't either. He was, struggling on an Oakland A's team. He had a very high ERA. He started the season as a starter, ended up being used as a reliever because he had that electric arm and electric fastball. I thought the move, and like you said a few minutes ago, what they gave up for him, which is Easton Lucas, who's a 26-year-old reliever who ended up making his big league debut with Oakland.
Yeah, congrats to him.
Yeah, shortly after the trade, was minimal. And I think the Orioles got a good, high upside player in exchange for a low, ceilinged reliever in Easton Lucas. I thought the trade itself made sense. I just wish that they hadn't tried to use him in as many high leverage situations as they did. I feel like they gave him a little bit too much rope at times when, and again, maybe if Michael Givens and Dylan Tate were healthy, they would not have had to rely as much on Shintaro Fujinami as they did. But I just feel like the move itself made sense, but I wasn't crazy about the plan that they had in place for him.
In my opinion, you make that trade because you figured we need a late inning addition, a high leverage addition, and
But then get a player with a lower ERA. I think get a.
I think the Orioles
higher
believed that they
floor
could
player.
get the best out of Shintaro Fujinami.
Yeah.
And at times they did, but at other times it went off the rails.
It just feels like if they had made that move in the offseason and then tried him out in spring training and he makes the club, but then, they DFA him, fine. But at a critical point in the season where, they need a lot of those wins, and it ended up not hurting them during the regular season. But if they had a full season with Shintaro Fujinami and a full year for their pitching staff and their player development staff to work with him on what needed to be fixed, because you saw flashes of it, but you just didn't get it consistently. And that's why I do think the Orioles ended up not including him on that playoff roster, is because they didn't trust him 100%.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the reason why they didn't include him on the roster. I still think there was room for him, but the fact that they included Brian Baker, who has been great in the past, but had not pitched meaningful innings since August for your team, and it's been, or maybe even July, but it's been the last 2 months of the year in AAA Norfolk, was a questionable decision.
Yeah.
Didn't work out. If he had been great, obviously we're singing their praises. If Brian Baker came back, it was great. It's the nature of this business. But I just think they felt like, hey, we went out and got Shintaro Fujinami. We're going to live and die by that decision.
Yeah.
And obviously it did not work in their favor. And it underscores why they should have gotten another reliever at the trade deadline.
Exactly. Yeah.
They did not. They got Jack Flaherty,
and that was it. And I completely agree. If they had made that Fujinami trade, which they did with significant time before the trade deadline, I think there was a week or two.
It was 2 weeks, so they had time to basically. And I completely agreed with the timing, because you have time to test out, is this going to
evaluate? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I just think that they were given then the explanation, and they were given an evaluation period, and I think they should have taken that and said Fujinami is not going to be enough, and they just didn't. And so maybe this grade is just partially based off of what the Orioles didn't do instead of what they did do, because they absolutely you never expected Felix Bautista to go down when he did, but if they had a little bit more in that bullpen, they certainly would have felt better about the group that they were going into the playoffs with, because I think they needed one more arm in that bullpen.
Absolutely. And instead you see in big spots in the postseason, you go with Jacob Webb, who had been very good since when they immediately claimed him from the Angels, had a very strong start to his tenure in Baltimore. But again, that you're kind of relying on a midseason waiver claim as a major postseason pitcher, which is perhaps underscores that there should have been more done earlier.
Yeah, it's a lack of depth at that point. Let's talk about the Jack Flaherty trade.
Yeah.
If you've read the BaltimoreBanner.com, our articles, the grades are not good for the Jack Flaherty trade. It was a trade that at the time I really thought was going to work, because he had been an ace in the past. certainly not for a few years, but you had seen it in the past. He had been on playoff teams before. He had that experience. He's still on the right side of 30. They didn't give up a whole lot in terms of players who were going to impact this year's team, next year's team. They gave up Drew Rom. They gave up Zach Showalter. They gave up Cesar Prieto. But they didn't get a whole lot back in Jack Flaherty. He ended up being pushed to the bullpen. He ended up not contributing much in that, in the ALDS. And it just flat out did not work.
Yeah, it didn't work at all. Had one pretty good start when he, his first one against Toronto, a team that he had done well against with St. Louis earlier in the year as well. It was a complete struggle for him. On paper it made sense.
Yeah,
and I completely agree with the thought process. It just the results were not there, and obviously lost this place in the starting rotation for good reason, because he struggled to get into the fifth inning almost any start after the first one, and that is not a recipe for success when you're a starting pitcher. If you cannot pitch into the sixth, or even the fifth, you're not going to put your team in a place to win many games, and you're also putting a lot on your bullpen. You're taxing a bullpen as it goes hand in hand with those two things, and that's a big struggle. As you mentioned, Cesar Prieto, good hitter. I don't think was going to factor into Baltimore's infield plans immediately.
He might for St. Louis.
Drew Rom came back and had his revenge game and pitched amazingly well for
the best game of his young career.
Yeah, pitched amazingly against the Cardinals. And I think that, as a lefty, maybe that's an area that Baltimore needs to focus on is how can we improve our lineup when there's a lefty on the mound? Because you saw early in the year that they had improved their numbers, basically because of what Adley Rutschman was able to do against lefties this year compared to last year.
Huge
Cedric Mullins this year compared to last year against lefties.
Yeah.
Overall a down offensive year for Cedric, but he did improve against lefties for the beginning of the year especially. Those two helped the numbers on paper look better against left-handed pitching. But overall, it was a major struggle against lefties for down the stretch and for much of the year still. So that's an area that teams will definitely be aware of. The Texas Rangers were very aware of it.
They were,
and they made the most of it.
Yeah. But in terms of Jack Flaherty,
wow.
I'm raining all the way.
Yeah, I went so off topic.
But yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of the Jack Flaherty move itself, it made sense at the time. I commend them for trying, but as they were getting closer and closer to the deadline, names were coming off the board, and maybe if the Orioles had been a little bit more aggressive, they could have gotten one of the higher upside guys like Jordan Montgomery. But also, you see the way that the ALDS played out. Over in 3 games, the Orioles were really only competitive in game 1. Maybe you could make the argument if they had gotten a legitimate ace like Jordan Montgomery, although I don't know if they would have started him over Kyle Bradish in game 1, but they could have.
But still, you have game 1 and game 2 pretty much locked.
Exactly. Yeah. That changes the equation for how Brandon Hyde uses the rotation in the playoffs, because if they had somebody who could start game 1 or game 2, you could say, all right, if they had, a much, much better start from Grayson Rodriguez in game 2, or a better start from an acquisition like Jordan Montgomery or like somebody else who was acquired there, maybe they lose game 1 behind Kyle Bradish. Maybe they win game 2 and they have a 1-1 record going to Texas. That pushes Grayson Rodriguez back. Maybe he struggles in game 3. They go down 2-1. But by that time, maybe Kyle Bradish is able to start game 4. So it could have one pitcher could have changed the equation for the series. I'm not saying one starting pitcher would have been the difference. The Orioles were swept. They were not particularly competitive in any game but one. But it would have certainly helped to have another ace type, top of the rotation guy for that series. Am I reading too much into everything that went on?
I think you are correct, and I would actually say it could change the entire. I mean that. It doesn't guarantee a win in the series, obviously, but I think it prolongs the series at the very least.
Certainly,
you imagine that a a higher level pitcher. Takes pressure off Dean Kramer in a game 3 that incredibly difficult for him.
Yep.
For many reasons. Takes pressure off a 23-year-old rookie in Grayson Rodriguez.
Exactly. Yeah.
Pushes them back one. Maybe you piggyback. Maybe, John Means getting injured too was, a big loss.
But if you had gotten, Montgomery's a lefty, so you would have had at least a different look to show the Rangers, because he ended up having to start 3 righties.
Yeah.
So
and
you never know what would have happened.
Kyle Bradish was good, not great, but good.
Yeah.
And then the starts from Kramer and Rodriguez put Baltimore in a hole. But if you remember also that game too, Baltimore came back and covered all the runs that Rodriguez gave up.
Yeah, they did. So maybe if he had a better start, they could have won that game.
Yeah, but it's still, it's like they came back and covered all those runs, which I was gonna say comes back to the bullpen.
True.
You come in that situation and you go Brian Baker walks bases loaded, then you go Jacob Webb gives up the grand slam, and you probably it's not first choice to use those 2 pitchers in that spot. And if you added more relievers at the deadline, or had the if you didn't have the unfortunate luck of a Dylan Tate getting injured, or Michael Givens getting injured, a Felix Bautista getting injured, it looks different. And that's probably a big area that things could have shifted in that realm.
And you wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com about how many swings the Rangers took on pitching.
They did, so many. Yeah.
And
a lot of them didn't work.
They had more injuries to their pitching staff than the Orioles did this past year. And they were able to make it to the World Series because they kept adding. The Orioles had their group, and they, other than Jack Flaherty, they stopped adding. And it ended up hurting them, so that when they got to the DS and John Means couldn't start, that ended up really hurting them. The Rangers, on the other side, they got through the DS without Max Scherzer because they also had Andrew Heaney, who they signed. They also had Jordan Montgomery, who they traded for. They also had John Gray, who they signed last year.
Yeah. So look what John Gray did out of the bullpen last night.
Exactly. And so when he was signed, that would have been a massive deal for the Orioles. It would have been, a key fixture in their rotation. But for the Rangers, because they have so much, it was just another piece of the puzzle. So, I'm not saying the Orioles have to go out and sign every single pitcher and sign Jacob DeGrom type pitcher, like the Rangers did last year, and that ended up not working out. But they took swings, and maybe that's the lesson that the Orioles can learn from the Rangers and can learn from other good teams is, Jack Flaherty just wasn't a big enough swing for what they needed at the time.
Yeah, and there's, there were other names on the market, and Aaron Savali. I don't believe that worked out that well for Tampa.
I don't think so.
I forget who the Phillies
added. Michael Lorenzen, I should say.
Yep.
Who threw a no-hitter but ended up being used out of the bullpen in the playoffs.
Yeah, so not as huge of an impact as maybe he could have had either. So it is a difficult thing to know. It's incredibly difficult to predict this stuff, and some of it comes down to luck. Some of it comes down to just you have to take more swings.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It worked for the Rangers. They took so many hacks, and here they are with a starting rotation and a relief staff that, their relievers were a complete wild card for most of the season. You didn't know what they were going to get, but the way they have starting pitchers that now can flood into the bullpen, it is helping this bullpen in October to help got them here.
Well, we are almost at an hour, and there sounds like there's a costume contest going on outside.
There is
at the Baltimore Banner
What's your
offices.
costume?
My costume is boring podcaster.
I was going to say devilishly handsome man, but
wow. That's not a costume though. That's just who I am.
I dressed up as a bird watcher. I actually had my binoculars in my backpack.
Did you have a bird to go with you? That'd be.
No, I did not. That was a big swing and miss on my part, not having a bird to go with my costume.
Yeah, get like a Beanie Baby or something.
I could have done that. I could have had a friend dress up as a bird. There were many opportunities here that none of them came together. But
that's okay.
It's the it's not my favorite holiday anyway.
That's okay. I don't think it's mine either. Too many goblins, not enough ghouls.
With that, I don't know where we're going now. With that, we will leave you.
At AF Kostka is Andy's Twitter handle. Please give him a follow. Please follow me at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports, where you can catch all the good stuff that the Baltimore Banner has to offer. We're going to try to keep these going throughout the off season as well on the BaltimoreBanner.com and the Banner's YouTube page.
Yeah.
So please tune in every week and keep your comments coming.
I will be in Lisbon, Portugal at this time next week.
Wow.
So you will not see me in this chair.
No, we're gonna make you join.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll fly back just for this then.
We are not. We're gonna be joined by Danielle Allentuck, I believe, next week.
I believe.
So we will we'll be back next week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.